As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
The next one hits close to home, too, for me personally, because I had both my parents were missionaries in Belgian Congo for 5 years. They said the U.S. needs to feed the world. And I can think of a lot of stories they told me which were they came home with a very different perspective than what they left. But if you could tell us what that means to you, is whether that's a truism or whether that's a faulty thinking.
Well, it is a faulty thinking. Again, the thinking is that other cultures and other countries don't have the resources to feed themselves. And essentially, there is, to my knowledge, there is not one single country in the world that has to be a net importer of food. Every single country can feed itself. No, in fact, right now, never in the history of civilization have we produced twice as much food as the world needs, and right now we are throwing away right now 50% of all the human edible food on the planet. That has never happened before. So we could essentially double the planet's population today and feed it just with what's being produced today if we didn't throw it away. Now, why do we throw it away? Well, because it's got a little, blemish on it. It's too long. It's too fat. I mean, I had a friend recently that was over in Zimbabwe, and he was at a green bean cannery or processor. They were exporting green beans to Europe, and they were packaging about 2 tons a day and throwing away 2 tons a day. And he asked a guy, he said, well, why are you throwing those away? He said, well, they're a little bit crooked, or they're too long, or they're too short, or they're too fat, or they're too thin. Yeah, it's just some cosmetic thing. And guess what? They throw them all away. And most of this is simply literally thrown away. It's not fed to animals. It's not even composted. It's just put in landfills. And so this whole notion that the U.S. needs to feed the world is simply the favorite little talking point of the industrial food system, the Monsantos, the Tysons, the Cargills, the Archer Daniels Midlands, those people, to keep people in bondage to this idea that we have to have industrial food and chemicals and ag subsidies and all this stuff, because if we don't, the world will starve. One of the most fascinating things that ever happened to me was about 8 years ago. I was invited to be a U.S. delegate to the Terra Madre, in Italy, the Slow Food Movement International Convivium. It's like a United Nations of integrity food producers. And I spoke a couple times, but when I wasn't speaking, of course, I went to listen to other speakers, and I made a point to go to every speaker that I could find from Africa. And without exception, every single African speaker opened his presentation saying, "You Westerners, butt out, get away. Your dumping junk food has destroyed our indigenous food culture, makes our people lazy, destroys our own indigenous resource base, and the first thing that we need to do for our own country is to get you Westerners out." And that was without exception. And this was not a political thing. It was not, libertarians or communists or anything else. It was just people speaking from the heart, explaining the situation. Every single country has plenty of resources to feed itself. All they need to do is utilize it better. Nobody goes hungry because there's not enough food. They go hungry for socioeconomic reasons. Maybe there's not a road. Maybe there's complete graft in the government. Absconding with land. I mean, there's a million reasons, but it definitely doesn't require the U.S. to feed the world.
Well, the next topic, you mentioned science is objective. It rings a bell for me because the same son of mine who got me thinking about economics in a new light a couple years ago, and really looking into sound money versus the debt-based economy that we're imperiled with. And that's why I started this channel. Also started looking into himself for his own research, a lot of topics that were controversial in science these days, thinking that certainly he could find rock solid truth in science. And the more he dug, the more he found that the mysteries seemed to be unresolved and highly politicized, but that he didn't always find, in fact, in the most important issues he looked into, did not find reassuring, conclusive confirmation that what we call science is really giving us a straight scoop on some of the most important issues of our time. So when you say the concept of science as objective being a questionable truism, what does it mean to you?
Well, what it means to me is that there are so many variables out there that we can't scientifically rule out, all the different variables in an experiment. I mean, the bedrock of science is that it has to be duplicatable, it has to be observable, and so there are a lot of things that we can't see because we don't believe in them. There are a lot of things that you can't duplicate because there are unknowns that you don't know, and so they get into it. Probably one of the most egregious and well-known ones right now of this is the Scottish scientist who duplicated the Monsanto GMO potato trials that Monsanto used to get the FDA to rule that the GMO genetically modified organism potatoes were substantively the same as any other tomato. And Monsanto did their feeding trials, but they purposely picked geriatric rats to do their feeding trials. Well, a geriatric rat has already fully developed his brain, has a lot of his social things pretty well ingrained. He's got fully developed sex organs and all this stuff, and so they didn't really see any change in these geriatric rats. In Scotland, when they took the exact same protocols but used juvenile rats, there were all sorts of problems. There were reproductive issues, social issues, mental issues. That the GMO potato-fed rats couldn't find their way through a maze as fast, and there was brain impairment, organ impairment, kidney failure, all sorts of problems. And so there's a perfect example of how you can use your biases, your prejudices, your paradigm in science to prove one thing or another simply by adjusting the paradigm. Now, a scientist listening to us will say, "Well, that was manipulated science. That was manipulated science." But the fact is that when you set up your experiment, you're setting it up within your paradigm. And if your paradigm is faulty, then you simply can't you can't measure what you can't imagine. And so I know that this one just infuriates people, but I could go on for a long time about the numerous different assumptions. I mean, if science were objective, then why for 40 years did the USDA and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, why did they promote our whole nation eating hydrogenated vegetable oil instead of butter and lard? I mean, that was so flawed science that today, not only are they saying, well, you just exercise your choice, it's fine. They're now saying that there is not 1 ounce of hydrogenated vegetable oil that you can ever eat without damage. I mean, you talk about an inversion of thought. That has got to be, the most cataclysmic shift that I've ever seen, and yet it was all based on science. The whole mad cow, feeding dead cows to cows. I was poo-pooed for a long time, because we didn't sign on to that. And boy, they did all their studies and their tests, and then suddenly, we had mad cow, and there was this big universal, oops, maybe we shouldn't ought to have done that. And where was the science? Well, they couldn't measure what they didn't want to see. And so there are just countless examples of these kinds of things that are that are just ridiculous. Colorado, it's illegal to have a rain barrel in Colorado, as if if you have a rain barrel and use it on your vegetables, on your garden, that's going to deprive somebody downstream of water. Actually, it would be the most wonderful thing that could ever happen in Colorado, because if everybody had rain barrels and watering their vegetables, not only would they have to send a lot fewer trucks into Colorado, which would have its own benefits, but secondly, that millions and millions of gallons of water percolating into the soil during the dry time would tend to hydrate the whole landscape, maintain springs and streams, and everything would run better on the hydrology cycle. But this is the mentality. We say if you're gonna take water in a rain barrel, you're hoarding the water, and nothing could be further from the truth.
It just echoes things I experienced as a child, too, growing up through a very observant kid through grade school and junior high and high school. I just kept noticing that every few years there was another big fad thing saying, oh, now you got to eat this, now you got to eat that. No, what we told you last time, they shouldn't eat so much of that, now you should eat more of this. And, I mean, I wasn't even the sharpest kid around, but I thought, I'm noticing that this is just ridiculous. If you don't like what they're telling you now, just wait a few years and it'll be good to eat whatever it wasn't good to eat before.
Yeah.
What about the next one? Now, you touched on this already. The government is more trustworthy than private business. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to that topic?
Not a lot. Yeah, I kind of got ahead of ourselves there on that one. But the people act. Here's the thing. A lot of people think that the government is some sort of a disembodied player in this whole game, and they don't have agendas, and they don't. And I read just recently a wonderful analysis by a new thinker, kind of a libertarian guy, and he said the first thing you have to understand is that the government is an entity. As soon as you don't think that the government is an entity, just like any other entity, from Chrysler to to Monsanto to whatever, as soon as you don't think the government's an entity, you have just allowed yourself to give to the government a free hand to do that nothing else gets. And I thought it was such a great statement. It was kind of new for me to read it, and I share it now because as soon as you posit that the government is an individual, the government is an individual with its own individual agenda, own individual interests, just like any other individual or any other corporation or business, suddenly it's not just a disembodied player in this thing. Right.
Well, it makes me think what you're saying is that we're kind of taught to think of the government as us. It stands for, it's the player who stands for us in the game because we're not big enough, so we send it in as representative. But there we are in the body. The government's going to stick up for us. The government's going to stand up for us. The government's going to watch out for us. Wait a minute. You're saying, no, the government's just another player in this game.
That's right. And I know so many people that disagree with my kind of libertarian take on things and say, oh, but all we have to do is elect better people. All we have to do is put better people in there. And we have plenty of quotes, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, read the Founding Fathers. I mean, they were terrified of big government. And because they knew that it has its own, it becomes its own entity. It becomes its own agenda. And so our colleges today they're full of teaching this ridiculous notion that if we just get good, honorable people in there, everything will be wonderful. And the fact is that if you give the government more power, you will inherently corrupt good individuals that go in there. people that complain about the lobbyists. We got to do something about these lobbyists and all these, expensive election, all this money pouring in, and the American government's the best one that money can buy, and you got all this stuff, and the fact is that the reason we have all the money pouring in there with all the lobbyists and all the special interests is because literally the government's finger is in everything in our lives, and so everything is for sale. If the government did not have its finger in everything in our lives and didn't have everything for sale, there wouldn't be anything to buy. And if there wouldn't be anything to buy, there wouldn't be any lobbyists there trying to buy it.
Well, your final point, ain't no money in farming. We certainly got some. My wife's grandparents had to move to the big city because they had a financial complete failure in farming in their life. So some of that has hit pretty close to home in some of our families. So, but you're saying it doesn't have to be that way. There's other ways. So talk about that truism that people think is no use in trying to get involved in the food supply because that's only for in the past and it's only for the poor in the past.
Yeah, well, every single era has had its people who have been successful and not successful in a given field. No pun intended, a given field. And so farming is no different. Now, there certainly have been, good times and better times or worse times, that's for sure, in general. But farming is no different than any other business, any other occupation, in that there are protocols and techniques for success, and there are techniques for failure. And generally, the techniques for failure are the ones that surround just doing what everybody else is doing, not being innovative, and especially doing whatever the government wants you to do. So if you're going to be successful, that means you're going to have to swim upstream and go completely counter to the orthodoxy of the day. The heretics are the ones that are going to be successful. And one of the reasons that farms can't do today what Grandpa did was, we're a perfect example. In 1961, my dad and mom bought this farm for $90 an acre, and feeder cattle were selling for $30 a hundredweight. So that's a 3-to-1 ratio, $3 land, $1 calf ratio. Today, the land is $7,000. Those same calves are selling for $200 a hundredweight. So yes, the calves have gone up, but the land has gone up way more. And so now instead of a 3-to-1, it's a 35-to-1 ratio. That is why what Grandpa did in the 1950s and made money will absolutely not work in the 70s. But farmers are without doubt the most conservative social group in any culture because farmers live with the seasons and they're slow to change, and they're just more conservative, so they're not usually out on the cutting edge of things. And so since farmers are that conservative, as things began to change, as the economy and the distribution system and consumers and things began to change, farmers tended not to change with those fast enough and got caught. And that's exactly what happens. And so what we've demonstrated is that you can actually farm without owning the land. There's a lot of land for lease and rent. In fact, in the next 15 years, 50% of America's agriculture equity is going to change hands because the average American farmer is now 60 years old. There has never been that much agriculture equity transfer in any culture except in conquest. It's never happened in peacetime. So we're in for some really interesting times, and what that means is we need to look at very different ways to farm. We need to go to mobile infrastructure, so you can divorce the farm from the land. Go to modular infrastructure, so you can start small and scale up with retained profits. So you don't have to, if you want to grow one chicken for Tyson, first thing you have to do is build a $400,000 factory house. If you wanted to start with pastured poultry, though, like us, you can start with pocket change, and you can grow it as you want to. So the modular aspect is powerful. and then management intensive. What that means is that yes, we do require more land on the farm, but we're making a very strategic decision to trade pharmaceuticals, concrete, and depreciable assets, and in some cases machinery and energy-intensive infrastructure. We're trading all that for additional labor. And the beauty about additional labor is it doesn't depreciate. You don't have to borrow it from a bank, and it creates additional accountability and innovation on site with the brain power of more warm bodies on the land, and so there are absolutely very, very profitable ways to farm today. Plenty of people are doing it, but it's not going to be GMO corn and beans commodity farming on and factory farming, and the fact that those industries are lobbying so aggressively to make sure that they get government payments to protect them should make any thinking person realize that those are not standalone profitable businesses. They only stand as long as the taxpayers are willing to concessionize them. Take out the concessions and they'll all collapse. It's a house of cards. There absolutely are ways to make good money in farming, and young people are coming to it by droves, and it's a very exciting time.
Well, Joel Salatin from Polyface Farms, everything you've been talking about just makes me realize you're making us look at things in ways that we've been kind of dumbed down or, lulled to sleep. You're kind of waking us up and looking at things in fresh and common sense ways. We'll never hesitate to have you back here on Reluctant Preppers anytime we can get you, and just thanks for joining us here again.
Thank you, Donegan. It's been a real honor to be with you.